I only needed shelter. But that copper rooster seemed to recognize me.
She was 22 and hunted. No home, no job, no safe address, just a canvas tool roll and $6 she had hidden inside the hem of her winter coat. And with that $6, she bought a condemned copper weathervane maker's forge outside Waltham, Middlesex County, Massachusetts, erased from tax maps in 1978. The north wall leaned 4 inches outward. Half the slate roof had slipped into the yard. Middlesex County closed it on October 3rd, 1996, with demolition planned for the first thaw of spring. Inside a giant copper rooster's comb, sealed between 2 soldered skins for nearly 80 years, waited a cache that would alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Cora Bell had been bending her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Lowell, she learned which floorboards complained, which cupboard closed quietly, and how to make one boiled egg last until noon. She polished school shoes with cooking oil and carried library books beneath her sweater when rain entered through the porch roof. Her father, Daniel Bell, left before her 4th birthday, yet remained as unfinished repairs: a brass hinge in a saucer, a penciled measurement beside the pantry, one red-handled hammer her mother forbade anyone to use. Marlene treated endurance like a bill that arrived monthly and could not be disputed. The person who showed Cora that hands could do more than hold a family together was her grandfather Amos Bell, a retired sheet metal worker living near the old Waltham watch factories. Every Saturday he took her to his backyard shed, where a blackened pitch bowl sat beneath the window and copper sheets leaned against the wall like dull sunset. He taught her to cut matching halves of a bird, warm the metal over charcoal, and drive shape from the reverse with rounded punches. Cora held the stake and brushed filings into a coffee tin. At noon they shared cheese sandwiches in wax paper, then polished one feather until it caught the light. Amos never hurried a seam. He said weather found every lie a maker left behind. Turn with the wind, Cora, but fasten yourself deep. She understood it not as philosophy, but as instruction joined to a hammer's sound and the steady pressure of his hand over hers. Amos died in February 2019 after a short illness. By the time Cora returned from the hospital, an estate company had cleared his shed. The pitch bowl patterns, raising hammers and ledgers were gone. Marlene said there had been bills. Cora found 3 curled copper shavings beneath the bench and sealed them in an envelope. Her cousin Wade came to stay the following year. He wore pressed shirts while unemployed and spoke softly enough that people leaned toward him. He knew Marlene's passwords, opened her mail, and corrected Cora's memories before she finished speaking. When money vanished, Wade supplied a reason. When strangers called, he carried the phone away. He never struck anyone. He arranged the air so everyone else felt guilty for breathing loudly. On April 17, 2022, Cora returned from a diner shift and found a black motorcycle helmet on the kitchen table. 2 men waited in the hall, rain shining on their shoulders. One turned the helmet by its chin strap while Wade's loan paper lay open beneath it. Cora's address appeared beside collateral residence. Wade had already fled. Marlene stood at the sink, gripping Amos's red-handled hammer. She did not look at Cora. The taller man slid over a photograph of Wade entering a bus station. Beneath it lay Cora's work schedule in her mother's careful block letters. You leave tonight, or they keep coming back. Exactly 8 words. Cora watched Marlene place the hammer in a drawer and close it with her hip. That small motion did what shouting could not. She packed 1 coat, 2 shirts, the copper shavings, and Amos's canvas tool roll. Her house key stayed beside the helmet. For 6 weeks she moved west and south by bus and foot, choosing stations with 2 exits. In Worcester she slept behind a laundromat's heating pipes until the owner found her and left coffee without questions. In Fitchburg, she spent $28 on a motel after seeing Wade's name taped inside a terminal restroom. In Concord, she slept beneath the bandstand, shoes tied to her wrist, and woke to frost on the grass. Her money fell from $63 to $41, then $24, then $11. She stopped buying coffee, washed in library restrooms, and dried socks beneath hand blowers. In Lexington, a church volunteer gave her a bus token and half a rye loaf. By the 6th week, she had $6 folded inside her coat hem. The Lexington Public Library was warm enough that her thawing hands ached near the local history shelves. She opened a discarded weekly newspaper to hide her face. Between piano lessons and a seized storage unit notice, a county listing offered one condemned commercial parcel. Copper weathervane forge, Beaver Street extension, Waltham, structure unsafe. Buyer assumes all liability, minimum consideration $6. At the reference desk, a librarian with silver-framed glasses checked the county number and called on Cora's behalf. The clerk said the parcel had received no offers. The transfer window would remain open until Friday afternoon, provided the buyer appeared in person with the full amount. Cora studied the bus schedule. The shortest route would leave her 9 miles from the clerk's office and take nearly everything except the $6. She folded the listing into Amos's tool roll and chose the longer road instead. $6 could purchase 2 quiet meals, or a place no one connected to Wade would think to search. Before sunrise, Cora boarded the first bus toward Waltham, carrying everything she owned toward a forge she had never seen. The bus left Cora beside a shuttered filling station at 6:40 in the morning, 9 miles west of the county offices. She walked east along Route 20 with Amos's tool roll across her back and the listing folded inside her boot. By noon, wind shoved at her shoulder. After dark, she turned onto a farm road and slept in a hay barn with her coat buttoned over her mouth. The temperature fell to 23 degrees. At first light, she followed the rail line toward Waltham. The city arrived through delivery breaks, church bells, and traffic crossing the Charles. She passed Wilson's Diner, McCarthy Hardware, Fern and Stem Florist, Crescent Laundry, and a watch repair shop with 3 clocks stopped at different hours. The county clerk's office occupied the ground floor of a brick municipal building with granite steps worn shallow at the centre. Cora entered at 2:17 Friday afternoon. Heat struck her face, carrying wet wool, floor wax, and old paper. Behind the counter sat a woman with a white streak through black hair. She flattened each page with the side of her hand before turning it. Her brass nameplate read MRS, Eleanor Pritchard, Land Records. Cora placed 6 $1 bills on the counter. Mrs. Pritchard looked at the money, the coat, then Cora's cracked knuckles. You understand the structure has been condemned? Yes. Ma'am, you understand there is no electric service? Yes. Ma'am. No tested water and no county assistance? Yes. Picture this, ma'am. Demolition begins when the spring ground softens. Yes, ma'am. The clerk removed her glasses. That was 4 warnings. I heard all 4. The deed was 3 pages. The waiver 2. Cora signed Cora Louise Bell wherever blue pencil marked a line. Mrs. Pritchard drew a brass stamp from beneath the counter, pressed it into a red pad, and brought it down with quiet weight. The county tree appeared across Cora's name. Take Beaver Street to the Old Mill Turn, she said. Pass the transfer station, then turn left where the pavement narrows. Look for a stone wall and 3 black walnuts. She was sliding the papers into an envelope when her fingers stopped. Bell, she said. Any relation to Amos Bell? He was my grandfather. Mrs. Pritchard opened a lower drawer and removed a yellow card softened at the corners. In faded ink, it read, Amos Bell, Copper Repair, with an old Waltham number crossed out. He repaired the courthouse weathercock after the hurricane of '85, she said. Everyone else wanted aluminum. He brought it back in 2 halves and made the seam disappear. Cora touched the card but did not lift it. His tools were sold. I heard, Mrs. Pritchard lowered her voice. The forge belonged to Silas Vane. Amos visited him when he was young. My father delivered copper to both of them. Cora had heard Amos mention Vane once, while annealing a horse pattern. He had called him the last man in Waltham who could raise a rooster breast without thinning the shoulder. Mrs. Pritchard slipped the card into the envelope. I cannot promise what remains, but your grandfather knew that building. Why was it $6? $1 would have looked like a gift. And the county wanted no accusation of kindness. Outside, daylight was thinning. Cora followed Beaver Street past a gravel yard and the long brick wall of an old mill. A man in a green cap stood beside a mailbox, holding a brindled dog by the collar. You heading to Vane's place? Cora nodded. Hollis Mercer. Dog's Ruth. She dislikes hats and tax assessors. Ruth sneezed and sat. Hollis pointed toward bare walnut branches beyond the bend. Path floods by the culvert. Keep to the stone side. The forge emerged behind the trees, 30 feet long and perhaps 18 wide, framed in chestnut and faced with clapboards weathered from red to brown. The slate roof sagged above the north room. A square brick chimney stood near the rear ridge, missing 3 courses. Over the door hung a narrow sign, S. Vane, Copper Forms. Most of its gold had vanished. Cora listened to the creak behind the property, then fitted the county key into a padlock stained green by runoff. The door opened 6 inches and caught. She pushed harder. A fallen copper horse scraped across the boards, its hollow body giving a low, wounded note. Cold air came from within, carrying soot, mice, and wet brick. The front room had been an office and finishing space. A long bench stood beneath 2 broken windows. Rain had cut dark channels through the dust, and flakes of old gilding clung to the floor like pollen. Plaster powdered beneath her fingers. Beyond a warped door waited the forge room. Its firebox was broad enough for a copper sheet, with an iron hood furred by rust. A pitch bowl rested on a stump near the window. Cora tapped its rim. The sound was deep and whole. She tasted dust when she breathed. A squirrel shifted leaves in the rafters. Beneath the sourness of old coal lingered beeswax and metal polish, a smell she knew from Amos's shed. Along the far wall stood unfinished weather vanes, a running horse without one flank, a whale missing its tail, and 2 small roosters beneath canvas. Above them hung a rooster nearly 5 feet from beak to tail, its copper body dark with patina and its comb unusually thick. Cora left it alone. There was almost no light. She found a broom head, cleared glass from one patch of floor, and spread her coat beneath the office bench. She gathered branches but would not trust the chimney. Supper was water from a public fountain and 3 crackers saved from the station. Night entered through every broken pane. The boards clicked as they contracted, each sound followed by patient silence. Cora lay with Amos's tool roll beneath her head and the deed inside her shirt. Through a gap in the roof, Vane's star remained visible. For the first time in 6 weeks, no footsteps approached where she slept. Turn with the wind, but fasten yourself deep. During the first 3 days, Cora learned the property by necessity. The well stood 30 yards behind the forge beneath a tilted plank cover. She lowered a rusted bucket until the rope slackened, then drew water cloudy with leaf stain. After boiling, It tasted faintly of iron, but left no film in the kettle. The outhouse leaned toward the creek and had lost half its door, so she nailed up a feed sack found beneath the eaves. Inside, the building announced its weaknesses through sound. The office floor sighed near the north wall. The forge room gave two sharp creaks beside the chimney, and none beneath the long workbench. Cora walked each path after dark until she could cross without waking the loose boards. On the fourth morning she returned to McCarthy Hardware with the county envelope beneath her coat. A brass bell gave one tired strike above the door. The store smelled of linseed oil, rope, and the mineral dust of open nail bins. The owner stood behind the counter, sorting screws with a hand missing the tip of its little finger. His apron read Thomas McCarty in red stitching, though the thread had faded toward pink. "You are the girl at Vane's forge," he said. "I own it." Thomas looked over her shoulder as if expecting an adult to correct the statement. No one did. Cora set Amos's yellow repair card beside the register. "I need a chimney brush, stove cement, lamp oil, and enough food to work 3 days. I have no money until I find work." Thomas read the card twice. Then he drew a ruled ledger from beneath the counter. "You pay what you can every Friday. No interest. No foolishness. I can agree to that." He wrote Bell. Cora beneath a row of accounts and slid over a stained paperback titled Repairs for the Owner of an Old House. Previous borrower left it behind. The chimney brush cost $7.85. 20 feet of jointed fiberglass rod was $6.40. A 2-pound tub of furnace cement cost $3.25. Lamp oil was 1.10. A box of long matches 29 cents, and a dented iron saucepan from the back shelf cost $1.75. Thomas added beans, salt pork, and 2 apples without entering them. Cora noticed. "So did I," he said. The chimney came first. She tied a rope around her waist and climbed from the rear lean-to onto the lowest slate course, testing each foothold with a hammer handle. 3 bricks at the crown lifted in her fingers. She set them aside, covered the opening with wire mesh, and fed the brush downward 1 rod at a time. The first pass brought only soot. The second struck a ledge of creosote hard enough to stop the brush. Cora worked it with short quarter turns, withdrew the rods, scraped the bristles clean, and began again. Black flakes fell through the firebox like broken glass. She spread damp burlap across the floor to contain the dust. Every 40 minutes she went outside, coughed into her sleeve, and rinsed her mouth. After 6 hours the brush passed from crown to throat without resistance. She cleaned the smoke shelf by hand, sealed 2 cracks with furnace cement, and left the damper open overnight. The following afternoon she placed crumpled newspaper beneath dry twigs, then added 3 narrow pieces of maple. The first flame bent sideways and died. She warmed the flue with a rolled sheet of burning paper, waited for the smoke to lift, and tried again. This time the chimney drew. The fire climbed slowly, orange against brick that had been cold for decades. Cora held one hand near the opening, not for warmth but to feel where the smoke returned. None did. She set the saucepan over the coals and cooked beans with a thumb-sized piece of salt pork. The room filled with steam, iron, and the plain smell of food made indoors. She ate seated on an overturned crate. The spoon was too hot and the beans remained firm at the center. They were enough. Once the firebox was safe, she began examining the workroom. She did not try to save everything. Water had ruined whole shelves of paper patterns, and mice had nested in a box of gilding cushions. She kept what still answered when handled. There were 3 raising hammers with polished faces, a narrow soldering copper blackened by use, 2 wooden mallets weighted with lead, and a row of steel stakes shaped for necks, breasts, and wings. Beneath the bench lay a leather sandbag gone hard at the edges. A pair of dividers opened without wobbling. Near the pitch bowl stood a jar of powdered pumice and a bundle of squirrel hair brushes wrapped in newspaper dated 1943. The unfinished horse was formed from 2 copper halves joined along the spine. Cora ran a finger over the seam and felt where the solder widened near the shoulder. The maker had corrected the balance by adding weight forward of the pivot tube. The whale carried hammer marks beneath its belly, each blow overlapping the previous one like scales. The smaller roosters were light and thin. When Cora lifted them, their feet swung freely from the mounting rods. The great rooster on the wall behaved differently. She lowered it with a rope looped over a ceiling beam. Dust left a clean silhouette behind it. At 5 feet long, it should have been awkward but manageable. Instead, the front pulled downward as if the bird held rainwater in its breast. Cora set it on folded canvas. She tapped the tail with a wooden mallet. The copper answered brightly. The wing gave a flatter note. Along the breast, the sound remained even until she reached the comb. There, the metal did not ring. It gave a small, contained knock. Cora turned the rooster beneath the window. The comb consisted of 2 repoussé copper skins soldered along their edge, but the rear seam was thicker than the others. Green patina concealed a line no longer than her thumbnail. She weighed the bird by hanging it from a spring scale found in a drawer. 42 pounds. Judging by its gauge and dimensions, it should have weighed 34 or 35. She tested the balance again, shifting the loop toward the head. The comb dipped. Behind the mounting tube, almost hidden beneath verdigris, sat a cedar disc the width of a nickel. Copper nails held it inside a shallow collar. It looked like a repair plug, except the wood grain ran too carefully with the curve. Cora cleaned the edge with a toothbrush and lamp oil. She did not pry. Instead, she warmed the surrounding copper with a cloth soaked in hot water, then worked each nail upward using the thin blade of Amos's pocket knife. The cedar disc came free without splitting. A smell of dry wood and old paper escaped the opening. Cora carried the rooster beside the fire but kept it beyond the heat. With long tweezers, she drew out a waxed linen cord. The cord was tied around a narrow oilcloth package that resisted at the shoulder of the comb. She stopped and studied the construction. The cavity lay between 2 copper walls. Whoever had made it had raised the outer comb deeper than necessary, then soldered a second skin behind it. The passage through the cedar collar had been designed before the final seam was closed. Cora pulled in increments no longer than the width of her finger. The first package contained 4 small raising punches, their ends polished to different curves. Each bore the initials AB. She held them against the light. Amos Bell. The second bundle was heavier. Inside lay 3 sheets of red copper, thin enough for detail work, rolled around a chamois cloth. Between them rested a brass mould cut with the figure of an angel blowing a trumpet. Its edges were dark from handling, but the carved lines remained exact. Robe folds, feathers, lifted chin, the narrow flare of the horn. A final packet caught in the opening. Cora turned the rooster on its side and eased the knot past the collar. The packet held a blue cloth notebook and a rectangular tin box sealed with wax along its lid. She placed everything on the bench before touching the box. The notebook contained columns of figures in Amos's hand, and another older script, wind speeds, tail lengths, pivot positions, ratios between surface area and counterweight. One page calculated the force against a church vane during a 90-mile-per-hour gust, with corrections for ice load and roof pitch. Cora closed it before reading farther. The tin box required a screwdriver. Wax broke away in dull red curls. Inside, banknotes had been folded into paper bands, each band marked by year and total. Coins filled the remaining spaces in cloth sleeves. Cora counted once at the bench, then again on the office floor where no cracks opened beneath the boards. There were older silver dollars, Morgan and Peace issues, some worn smooth at the eagle's breast. $20 Liberty gold pieces lay wrapped separately, their edges protected by tissue. She found Indian head half eagles, several Barber $half and rolls of Mercury dimes darkened at the rims. Beneath the money rested a bronze military medal dated 1918. Its ribbon faded to the colour of dried violets. She counted the notes last. The total came to $45,200. Not $45,000 even. Not a round inheritance prepared for a lawyer or bank. $45,200, measured and kept by someone accustomed to exact quantities. Cora wrote the figure on the back of an old invoice, checked every band, then counted the coins a third time. The number did not change. She replaced the money inside the tin and wrapped the medal separately in clean cloth. The brass angel mould remained on the bench, heavy enough to hold both hands still. The blue notebook contained a folded letter, but she did not open it. Evening had settled beyond the broken windows. Cora carried the tin into the office, slid it beneath the soundest floorboard, and returned the Rooster to the workbench. Then she went outside. The creek had risen from 2 days of thaw and moved black between the stones. She stood beneath the walnut branches, watching the water bend around a fallen limb without carrying it away. Behind her, the forge held one small fire and more silence than she could yet understand. Turn with the wind, but fasten yourself deep. Morning came pale and windless. Cora set the blue notebook beside the brass angel mould and warmed her hands around a cup of boiled well water. When she unfolded the letter, the first downstroke of the capital M stopped her. The handwriting belonged to Amos, though age had narrowed it and made the lines lean toward the right. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened the Rooster correctly, then you have already shown more patience than most people bring to old work. Doctor. Nathaniel Ward at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston told me in March of 1987 that the tumour in my pancreas would not wait for another season. He gave me months, perhaps less. I did not tell the town. I came back here and finished what could be finished. The trade in this forge began with Elias Vane, born in Concord in 1818, who opened the shop in Waltham in 1849. His daughter Mercy Vane Bell learned to raise copper beside him and carried the patterns to Lowell after his death in 1891. Mercy's son, Josiah Bell, returned them here in 1907. Josiah taught my father, Samuel Bell, and Samuel taught me, 4 generations from Concord to Waltham to Lowell and back again, each leaving hammer marks the next could read. The forge closed on November 14th, 1955. After that came more than 30 years of silence. My older brother Henry was killed near St. Mihiel in France during the Great War. The medal in the tin belonged to him. My father stopped making angels after the telegram arrived, but he never melted the mould. Some grief must be carried whole. If you intend to work the copper, anneal it at a dull red near 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, then let it cool in still air before shaping. For soft solder, use 1 part tin to 2 parts lead, but never trust a seam until you have scraped it bright. When laying gold leaf, allow the oil size to cure 12 hours in dry weather and longer when the creek is high. Balance a vane by surface, not appearance. The tail must carry roughly 1¼ times the wind area forward of the pivot. The notebook contains the calculations. The money was saved from repairs, pattern sales, and years when I spent less than I earned. Use it for the building if the building can still be kept. Do not waste it trying to make the place look new. Newness has no virtue by itself. Inheritance is not possession. It is the work another person could not finish, placed carefully where willing hands might find it. Behind the forge, follow the creek upstream until you reach the split walnut. 6 paces north stands a fieldstone with a trumpet carved low on its eastern face. Henry's full name is beneath the moss. Clean it when you're able. There is one more thing. The brass mould was Mercy's. She made the first angel in 1876 for a church outside Worcester, after 3 men told her a woman could not calculate the balance. The vane remained through the blizzard of 1888. Do not prove yourself to people who have already chosen not to see you. Make the work exact. Let the weather answer them. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. Amos Samuel Bell, April 2, 1987. Cora read the letter twice. On the second reading she moved her finger beneath each line without touching the ink. Then she folded the paper along its original creases, pressed the folds with her thumbnail, and returned it to the notebook. She carried a wire brush and a tin cup through the back door. The creek ran fast from the thaw. At the split walnut, she counted 6 paces north and found a low fieldstone crowded by fern roots. Moss covered the eastern face. Water loosened the green crust. The brush revealed first a trumpet, then letters cut by hand. Henry James Bell, 1894 to 1918. Cora cleared the base, removed 2 stones that had rolled against it, and placed the bronze medal on top while she worked. When she finished, she tied the medal's faded ribbon around the carved trumpet for 1 minute, then wrapped it again. Back inside, she cleaned Amos's narrow soldering copper with pumice until the dark scale gave way to metal. She laid its heavy head beside the fire and watched the tip warm. It had not been used for decades, but when she touched it to a scrap of solder, the alloy softened and ran in a bright line. The building had not saved her alone. Mrs. Pritchard had delayed closing the records window while Cora signed. Hollis Mercer had pointed out the flooded path and held Ruth by the collar. Thomas McCarthy had opened a credit ledger without asking where she had slept. The librarian in Lexington had placed the county call, then pretended not to notice when Cora remained beside the radiator until closing. None had changed her life in a single grand gesture. Each had moved one obstacle far enough for her to take the next step. Before this story moves on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to help. A meal, a ride, a patient answer, or simply a door left open. Tell us about it in the comments, and let that person's kindness travel farther than they ever expected. That night Cora spread Amos's punches, the brass angel mould, and the blue notebook beside her bedroll. She placed the letter beneath the tool roll, close enough that her hand could find it in the dark. The first snow came on December 2nd, 6 inches by noon, soft enough to hide the broken slate and heavy enough to reveal every place the roof sagged. Cora read the roofing chapter 3 times beside the forge fire. Then she measured the building twice, 30 feet by 18, with 2 roof planes and enough waste for the uneven eaves. She calculated 12 squares of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 30-pound felt, and 35 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Thomas McCarthy studied the figures, corrected one multiplication, and carried out a roofing hatchet with a scarred hickory handle. It belonged to my brother. Cora reached for her ledger. No charge for ghosts, he said. A former roofer named Edwin Pike arrived the following morning, wearing a wool cap patched over one ear. He was 71 and walked with his left boot turned outward. Cora offered him day wages from the first opened band of cash. Edwin closed her hand around the money. Pay me by learning. They worked 11 days. The worst rafter had split beside an old knot, so Edwin showed her how to sister it with a full-length spruce member. Carriage bolts staggered to avoid creating another weak line. They snapped a chalk line at every 5th course. Felt went down from the eaves upward, each strip lapping the one beneath it. Cora learned to set a nail in 3 strokes, first to place, second to drive, third to seat. Edwin stopped beside her on the fourth morning. That nail's proud. Cora reached for the hammer. Pull it. She did. Wind crossed the open rafters and lifted snow dust into their faces. At dusk, Cora carried shingles up the ladder while Edwin trimmed the valleys. Neither spoke when their hands were too numb for accuracy. On December 15th, they set the final ridge cap. Edwin climbed down first and stood in the yard while Cora poured a bucket of water along the upper course. Nothing entered the room below. The roof was not straight. It was sound. January exposed what firelight had concealed. Several bricks beneath the crown had spalled into thin red shells, and mortar powdered beneath Cora's thumb. She dismantled the damaged courses one brick at a time, numbering each reusable piece in chalk. Thomas helped her mix 3 parts washed sand to 1 part hydraulic lime, then add fire clay at 1 part to every 3 parts mortar near the flue. Portland cement is faster, he said, and wrong. For 3 weeks she worked in temperatures that remained in the 20s. She soaked each old brick before bedding it, filled the joints fully, and struck them only when the mortar held a thumbprint without sticking. Every 15 minutes her bare fingers went numb. Gloves protected the skin but could not feel whether a joint was packed, so she warmed her hands over a covered tin of coals and returned to the scaffold. One morning a brick slipped, broke across the hearth, and scattered the careful edges she had spent an hour preserving. Cora swept the pieces into a bucket and began another. By late January, the chimney stood 3 courses higher, capped with stone and fitted with a simple spark screen. She let the lime cure before testing it. The first smoke curled lazily inside the firebox, then lifted. A second piece of maple caught. The draught strengthened until the flames stood upright and the smoke drew clean beyond the roof. Cora watched from the yard until the last grey thread vanished into winter air. The front room boards were white pine, wide enough to remember trees no modern mill would have cut. Hand-forged rosehead nails held them to the joists, each head slightly different from the next. Cora set every loose nail with a square punch, replaced 2 rotten board ends, and rented a random orbit sander for $14 per day. Thomas warned her that the pine would scar if she paused while the disc was moving. She began with 80 grit, guiding the machine with both hands and moving with the grain. The first pass removed soot, old wax, and the grey surface raised by years of damp. 120 grit softened the swirl marks. 220 left the boards smooth without erasing the shallow cuts made by boots and benches. She collected the dust in paper sacks and carried them outside before lighting the fire. The oil went on in 3 thin coats, each rubbed until no wet patches remained. She waited 24 hours between the first 2 and allowed the final coat a full 48-hour cure. Under the oil, the pine shifted from dark honey toward mahogany where the grain had absorbed decades of smoke. On one bad morning, Cora set the sander beside the door and could not make herself lift it. She walked to the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, boat and foot raised above water, dark as sheet metal. For nearly an hour, it did not strike. It only watched the current and adjusted its balance when the wind moved through the reeds. Cora stayed until it flew. She did no work that day. The following morning she finished the final pass before breakfast. There were 8 windows in the forge. 3 had no glass at all. 4 held cracked panes patched with cardboard or cloth. The last contained 1 wavering original pane, marked in the corner with the date 1788, scratched by a diamond point. Cora preserved it. She removed each sash, labelled the parts in pencil, and burned old paint from the joints with a low flame held far enough away to protect the wood. Rotten muntin ends were repaired with small Dutchman patches rather than replaced. Thomas showed her how to knead DAP 33 glazing putty until it warmed beneath the heel of her hand. Cora rolled it into narrow ropes, pressed each pane into a thin bedding coat, then drove glazing points flat with the wood. The finish bead was drawn in one continuous stroke, knife angled so rain would shed from glass to sash. The counterweights still hung inside the walls, but the original cords crumbled when touched. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, fed each line over the pulley, and tied a figure-8 knot through the weight eye so it could not pull free. The first repaired window stuck halfway. She planed the swollen rail by the thickness of 2 paper sheets and rehung it. The second rattled until she reset one pane. By the 7th, her putty lines had become clean enough that she no longer needed to scrape them twice. She saved the 1788 glass for last. Its surface bent the walnut branches into slow waves. Cora cleaned only the loose dirt, refusing to polish away the small bubbles and drawn lines left by the old cylinder process. When she raised the sash, the cords took the weight evenly. A chickadee landed on a walnut branch outside, no farther than the length of her arm from the glass. It tilted its black-capped head toward the room, gave one small call, and remained while Cora lowered the window into place. The walls near the chimney had lost whole islands of plaster, exposing hand-split oak lath darkened by smoke. Cora's first patch sagged before noon. The second cracked around the edges. The third fell intact onto the floor during the night. Thomas brought an old burlap bag from his shed. Inside lay horsehair saved from his father's upholstery work. Clean, coarse, and still bound in loose hanks. Cora mixed lime putty with sharp sand, teased the hair apart, and folded it through until no strand gathered in a clump. She pressed a scratch coat between the lath, scored it diagonally, and let it firm. The brown coat went on 3/8 of an inch thick and cured for 72 hours beneath damp cloth. The finish coat was 1/8 of an inch, worked with a wooden float until the wall held light without appearing polished. The patches remained visible because old plaster and new lime never dried to the same colour. Cora ran her palm across the final seam. These patches will hold another 100 years. Doris Avery owned Wilson's Diner and wore a pencil through the knot of her grey hair. Twice a week she left a paper bag on the forge doorstep before sunrise. One held biscuits and apple butter. Another held beef stew, sealed beneath wax paper. When Cora followed her to the diner with money, Doris pushed the bills back using one flour-dusted finger. In Candles When the Shop Reopens, Cora did not say there might never be a shop. She folded the bills and later repaired the diner's bent copper coffee scoop without charge. Caleb Mercer arrived on a blue Schwinn with a splitting maul tied across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow as a fence rail, and had a cowlick that lifted beneath his cap. Without asking, he split the maple rounds beside the shed and stacked them bark side upward. Cora offered him $3. He stared at the money, then at the ground, my mother said. About your grandfather, that was all. The next Saturday he returned with his own gloves. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on the road, a tall man in a brown overcoat polished pale at the elbows. He never entered unless invited. He tipped his hat when Cora worked outside, sometimes leaving a bundle of newspapers for kindling. On the morning she raised the chimney cap, he stopped beneath the ladder. Keep these hands steady. Then he walked on. Cora postponed the cellar until February 11th, when the ground was hard and the creek had fallen below the lowest stones. The door lay beneath a trap in the rear room. 7 granite steps descended to a fieldstone floor measuring 12 by 15 feet. The air smelled of mineral damp, old apples, and iron. At the centre lay a dressed granite slab, smoother than the surrounding stones. A small trumpet mark had been carved near one corner. Cora swept it clean but did not attempt to lift it. The slab had waited longer than she had been alive. It could wait until she understood why. Under the third step, her broom struck wood. She worked free a small oak box wedged behind the riser. Inside lay a brass key wrapped in linen and a tintype darkened at the edges. The key's bow was shaped like a rooster comb, each point filed by hand. The tintype showed a young woman standing outside the forge in the summer of 1903. She held a raising hammer against one hip. Her hair was pinned high, her jaw square, and the set of her eyes was so familiar that Cora lowered the picture before looking again. On the back, scratched through black varnish, were the words, Mercy Bell, daughter of Elias Vane, Edge 25, summer of 1903. Cora placed the photograph beside Amos's letter. The key went onto the mantel above the fire. She tested it in the desk, the tool chest, and the tin box. It fit none of them. She left it where the light could reach it. Snow withdrew from the stone wall in grey ridges. The creak grew loud enough to hear from the front room, and pale walnut catkins opened above the path. Cora had enough tools to begin a full weathervane. She did not. She spent one old coin on copper sheet, charcoal, and a small jar of flux. On scraps no larger than her palm, she practiced raising feathers, closing seams, and laying narrow lines of solder without flooding the detail. Some samples buckled. Others split where she had failed to anneal evenly. She kept every one. The brass angel mould remained wrapped on the bench while she copied its curves onto paper and learned how Mercy had distributed weight through the trumpet and wings. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Cora completed her first full weathervane. It was not the angel. She chose a small marsh heron, 31 inches from beak to tail, formed from 2 sheets of 16-ounce copper. She raised the shoulder and thigh over the restored pitch bowl, annealing whenever the metal began to resist. The halves met along a seam so narrow it vanished beneath the solder. A weighted tail balanced the long beak precisely over the pivot. On December 18th, she carried it into the yard. Caleb, now taller and wearing Thomas's old apron, held the ladder while Cora fixed the vane above the forge ridge. A west wind crossed the creek. The heron turned once, paused, and settled with its beak toward the weather. Cora watched for several minutes before climbing down. Inside, the forge no longer resembled a room rescued for display. It looked worked, and the white pine floor bore fresh marks beneath the bench. Copper patterns hung beside the chimney. The 1788 glass softened the afternoon into wavering bands, and the repaired plaster showed pale against the older wall. Amos's letter remained inside the blue notebook, wrapped in clean linen. Mercy's tintype stood on the mantel beside the brass key. The key waited until the walnut tree lost a limb in an ice storm. It happened in January. The fallen branch split close to the trunk, exposing a narrow iron plate embedded beneath bark that had grown around its edges. Cora cleared the wound with a draw knife and found a keyhole beneath a cap of green corrosion. The rooster comb key entered without force. A brass cylinder lay hidden inside the tree, protected by waxed cloth and a cedar sleeve. Cora carried it to the bench before opening it. Inside was a folded 48-star flag. No larger than a handkerchief, its blue field faded nearly grey. Beneath it lay a note dated October 6, 1918. Mercy Bell had written from Waltham while Henry served with the American Expeditionary Forces in France. She described the influenza arriving in Massachusetts, the church bells kept silent to prevent gatherings, and the families waiting for telegrams. The note was addressed to Henry, though it had never been mailed. Your father says the angel mould is finished, but he has not touched it since you left. I oil the steel each Sunday. When you come home, we will raise another together. The walnut is still young. I have placed your flag here because a thing kept safe can still belong to the future. The telegram announcing Henry's death had arrived 9 days later. Cora refolded the flag along its existing lines and placed it in an archival box Thomas ordered from Boston. The note joined the medal, but not permanently. On November 11th, 2025, the anniversary of the armistice, she carried Henry's bronze medal to Mount Feake Cemetery in Waltham. Reverend Boyd read the name once. Caleb placed a small copper trumpet at the grave marker. There were no reporters and no prepared speeches. Cora tied the medal ribbon around the stone, long enough for the morning service, then returned it to the forge beside Mercy's note. Of the money hidden in the Rooster, she used 4 coins. 1 paid for the first copper sheet. 1 purchased kiln-dried spruce for the roof repairs. A third covered the glazing glass, and the 4th bought a proper fire extinguisher after Thomas refused to extend further credit until she owned one. The notes and remaining coins went back into the tin box. Cora wrapped it in new oilcloth, sealed the lid with beeswax, and placed it inside the granite chamber beneath the cellar slab. With Caleb's help, she lifted one edge just enough to slide the box below. On top she placed a short inventory and a sentence written in ink, for the next one who arrives with careful hands. The forge reopened without ceremony. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard. Copper repairs. Weather vanes balanced and mended. Beaver Street. No telephone number appeared at first. Customers wrote their names beneath the card or left messages with Doris. By spring, more than 40 names filled a mailing list kept in a ruled school notebook. Cora repaired barn horses dented by hail, church roosters weakened at the pivot, and 1 copper fish that had not turned since 1962. She accepted work slowly. No object left until it moved under a box fan without shuddering. One April afternoon, Caleb arrived carrying a pine board wrapped in a blanket. He had carved the original name into it, Bell Copper Forms. Beneath those words, in smaller letters, he had added, "Daughters." Cora traced the new line with 1 finger. "There has only been 1 daughter here," she said. Caleb rested the sign against the bench. So far, they hung it beneath the faded Vane sign, leaving both names visible. That evening Cora opened a blank notebook at Amos's desk. She sharpened a pencil with his pocket knife, then wrote across the first page. "My dear one, whoever you are." She described where the safe floorboards lay, how much lime remained in the cellar, and which walnut root lifted after heavy rain. She recorded the proper balance point for the heron and the correction she had made after its first winter. She did not explain Wade, the motorcycle helmet, or the house key left behind in Lowell. Those belonged to a road the next keeper would not need to walk. Instead, she wrote about Doris's paper bags, Edwin's 3-stroke nail lesson, Thomas's ledger, Caleb's sign, and Mrs. Pritchard's brass stamp. "Inheritance," she wrote, "is work kept ready for someone not yet known." Outside, wind moved through the walnut branches and crossed the ridge. The copper heron turned toward the creek, then back toward the road. Turn with the wind, but fasten yourself deep. Cora closed the notebook and placed it beside Amos's letter. At dusk, she banked the fire, swept 1 line of copper filings from the bench, and opened the front door to let the last workshop heat meet the cold air. The sign shifted slightly on its hooks but remained level. The copper weather vane maker's forge waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office, Mrs. Pritchard retired the following year. While clearing her desk, she found one of Cora's $6 bills in the back of the land record drawer, held beneath Amos Bell's yellow repair card. She left both where they were